Order. Adam Dance to move the motion.
I beg to move that the House has considered support for dyslexic pupils at school. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Ms Butler. I'd like to start by thanking the Backbench Business Committee for granting this debate and honourable members across the House for supporting it. I'd also like to thank all the young dyslexic pupils, their families and the campaigners for their tireless work to raise awareness. You're all such inspirations. Dyslexia is a neurological difference that affects around 1 in 10 of us. That is more than 1 million children in classrooms across the UK. It presents itself in a range of ways and a different degree of severity. For me, words float on the page, which you can probably tell they're doing at the moment. I struggled with reading and writing and spelling, and my reading age is actually only a reading age of a 12-year-old. So bear with me through this speech. But dyslexia is not a flaw or something to be ashamed of. I think that is the most important thing we can take from this debate today, because it breaks my heart when I hear young dyslexics say, I wish I never had it. I feel ashamed. I felt stupid, or I will never achieve anything. Dyslexia has no link between intelligence and poor behaviour. Being dyslexic just means you learn and express yourself differently. And while that comes with challenges, it also often means you have strengths in problem solving, resilience and creativity or practical work. That is my message to all dyslexic young people. You can do anything in life, and it is the job of schools and your government to help achieve that. Unfortunately, however, support for dyslexic pupils at school is still not where it should be. I've said this before, but in Somerset, chronic underfunding means support has gotten worse since when I was at school, despite the hard work of educators. I left school in 2008, and I had more support in school then than there is now. We've gone backwards as a country, and it's not good enough. Of course I'll give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and he's making an excellent speech on a very important subject. Now, early diagnosis is key for dyslexia students to access necessary support and assistive technology. Yet, as you were pointing out, 80% of children leave school without a formal diagnosis. So does the Honourable Member agree that a universal screening programme could help to ensure that all children, regardless of their background, have their needs recognised and talents nurtured by our education system?
Thank you. I totally agree, and actually I'll come on to that later on. And actually you probably saw I had a 10-minute rule bill about getting support, so if you want to sign that letter, please do. The biggest problem is, of course, identifying dyslexia. While three children in average class likely have dyslexia, 4 in 5 leave school without having their needs properly identified. There is no NHS pathway to diagnosis for dyslexia, as it is not a medical condition. This means diagnosis and support is based on a postcode lottery and family's income. The average cost of diagnosis is £600, which is unaffordable for too many of my constituents, creating real inequality. 90% of children in higher income households are diagnosed, to compare to 43% in lower income households. This is not good enough. If we cannot identify needs, how can we even support young dyslexics through education? For those that do get their needs identified, it often comes far too late, and even then the support they need may just not be available. Our councils are in desperate need of financial support to keep up SEND provision. Our brilliant teachers just do not have the appropriate training or proper resources they deserve to support all their pupils' needs. Teachers should not have to learn about dyslexia and work out classroom adjustments in their spare time. They should be supported from day one. Even simple things just ain't available. In these day and age, access to assistive technologies like a word processor shouldn't be a challenge. Yet the BDA find only 18% of dyslexic people they surveyed reported having access to assistive technology at school. Without support, the classroom becomes inaccessible for dyslexic people. The curriculum is too narrow and not developed with dyslexia properly in mind. Exams like GCSEs test written ability and recall in timed environments. Not knowledge, this ends up pushing dyslexic people who do not have enough alternative qualification through pathways. The impact is devastating on young dyslexic people. Of course.
Thank you for allowing me to intervene. This is an incredibly important subject. I left school before I was 17, and that was the end of my education. I've had a fantastic business career, I've written lots of novels, and I'm now an MP. That was despite no help from the educational system at all, and society as a whole, putting across the message that many people like me are not at the same level as more intellectual people at school. So it's a really important subject and close to my heart. Would you agree that society should recognise people like you and I more to help them get on with their careers? Thank you.
I do agree with my honourable friend. The impact is devastating on young dyslexic people's education and their mental health. 26% of 11-year-olds leave primary school below the expected reading standard. At GCSE, only 1 in 5 pupils with dyslexia achieve a grade 5 or above in English and Maths, compared with over half of pupils without special education needs. The British Dyslexia Association most recently research finds 70% of young dyslexic people report feeling bad about themselves because of their dyslexia. 78% report having experienced people assuming that they are not as clever as others due to their dyslexia. That's not true. We've already heard that today from these interventions. I know if I had not had the support at school, I might have ended up in prison or even taken my own life. Like too many others who never get the help they need, sadly, young people with dyslexia are 3 times as likely to be suspended from school, twice as likely to be reported absent from school, and of course.
The statistic that shocked me, my son is dyslexic, is that 80% of people leave school without it being diagnosed. And that is the concern, that people will go through life not even realising why they struggle with certain things. Does the honourable member agree that this needs to change?
I definitely agree. Thank you for your comments. And 3 times as likely not to be employed in education or training by age 16 and 17. Research suggests that around half of people in prisons may have dyslexia, compared with 1 in 10 in the general public. I've heard from people who have come out of prison and found out that they were dyslexic. They realised that had they gotten the support, they may not have given up on school and ended up where they are today. That tells us all we need to know about dire consequences of not getting support for dyslexic people. So, what can we do? Because action is long overdue. We have to make dyslexic and other neurodiversity like ADHD, autism and dyscalculus a priority by having a national dyslexia strategy and a national body for SEND to oversee it. Any changes have to start with early identification, teacher training. That is why I've proposed my bill on universal screening and teacher training. The idea is simple, but the Department of Education uses its expertise and resources to work with all of us to create a universal screening programme for neurodiversities in primary school age children to identify their needs and provide strategy guidance on training on neurodiversity in additional teacher training and continuous professional development. The screener can be classroom-based and done in a cost and time-effective way. This will allow teachers to better recognise the signs early, with better training teachers can make for those all-important in-classroom adjustments, like using more visible audio and physical aids as well as offering tailored support. Teachers also need to be taught how to use assistive technology throughout teacher training and assessments, such as targeted early intervention can move some children at risk of being adversely impacted by dyslexia to no or low risk, and that's important. More broadly, we need to rethink assessment design so assessments focus on measuring understanding, not memory recall or spelling accuracy. I make many mistakes with spelling, except where essential. That has to start by looking at other forms of assessment beyond exams and strengthening vocational education. I'm hoping V-levels will offer some of this. Access to assistive technology must be a standard, and how to use it must be properly taught through Key Stage 2 to support independent learning. I cannot end without addressing the elephant in the room, the now delayed SEND White Paper. I think the Minister and her team have heard the fear and anxiety reported cuts are making and the real frustrations at the delay. I would just like to ask the Minister to address reports that dyslexic children may lose one-to-one support and extra teaching staff support. If that is the case, I urge the Government to rethink again. Cutting cost at the expense of young people's future is never worth it. Madam Chair, ultimately, I think we all want the same thing, an inclusive and fair education system that gives young dyslexic people the chance to shine. With the changes I've set out, we can take a big step towards that future. So I hope the Minister will take these ideas on board and work with us as they finalise the SEND White Paper. Without these changes, I fear this will be another missed opportunity and an entire generation of dyslexics failed by the Government. Thank you.
Thank you. I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. Juliet Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today, Ms Butler. I wanted to begin by thanking the Honourable Member for Yeovil, my co-sponsor, for his continued support and his tireless campaigning on the issue of dyslexia. I rise not only as a Member of Parliament for Broxtowe, but also as the Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Dyslexia, a group I've been a member of since 2016, some 8 years before becoming an MP, and now have the pleasure of chairing. After my son was diagnosed with dyslexia, I set up a not-for-profit organisation to raise awareness of dyslexia, training educators on how to identify dyslexia in the classroom, and offering support to dyslexic children and the parents of dyslexic children, but is something that my family did not receive. Sadly, despite that being many years ago, in the UK, we are still remiss at early identification of dyslexia, and many children and young people are still not being identified and are still struggling. Too many children go through their childhood feeling disempowered, confused and sad because they do not receive the support, the understanding or recognition of how hard they are working because dyslexia has not been identified. In the UK, around 10% of the population are dyslexic. Yet despite its prevalence, dyslexia remains underdiagnosed and parents often struggle to get their children the support they need. Dyslexic people often face barriers that affect their self-esteem, educational outcomes, the loss of love of learning, earning potential, and are overrepresented in the prison system.
On that point,
of course.
Shankar.
Thank you to my honourable friend for giving way. We know that our children and young people, dyslexia frequently co-occurs with other special education needs like ADHD or development language disorders. But with fewer than half of the HCPs issued on time last year, too often families are left struggling to secure the support they need desperately for their children. Does my honourable friend agree that giving dyslexic pupils the additional needs and the right support means ensuring access to EHCPs is absolutely essential?
Juliet Campbell.
Intervention, and I absolutely agree that the support that young people need is crucial, not just for their education, but also across and throughout their lives. So I talked about overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, and these challenges should not be an inevitable part of being dyslexic. A recent report published by the British Dyslexia Association, aptly called Set Up for Someone Else, was a disheartening read, where it identified that 70% of young people said their dyslexia makes them feel bad about themselves. 78% of the young people said that they assume they are not clever because they are dyslexic. 59% of the young people have been bullied or teased about their dyslexia. And 65% of young people hide their dyslexia. But it doesn't stop there, Chair. Parental income makes a difference. 90% of young people in high-income households are diagnosed, compared to only 43% in the lowest income households. And only 30% of young people in lower income households say the support they receive at school is good, compared to 86% of young people in higher income households. Embracing the strengths of dyslexia is essential so we can change the trajectory of their lives and for current and future generations. People with dyslexia often shine in creativity, problem solving, verbal reasoning, and have excellent entrepreneurial skills. So this year, during Dyslexia Awareness Week, I called upon the government to introduce a national dyslexia strategy to even the playing field for dyslexic people by reforming the teacher training curriculum to ensure educators are provided and equipped to recognise and support dyslexic learners, standardising dyslexia identification and interventions across schools, and prioritising early identification and assessments, allowing tailored support to be given as early as possible in a child's educational journey. These steps will help create a more inclusive and effective educational system, one that recognises neurodiversity can also be a strength. Chair, it is 130 years since the term dyslexia was coined by Rudolf Berlin. The word means difficulty with words. In 1970, a report was written called The Dyslexic Child, which identified developmental dyslexia as an issue requiring urgent official attention. In 1972, another scholar argued that preventative and supported steps taken early are immeasurably more humane and fruitful than attempts to remedy a problem which becomes increasingly complex as a child gets older. This is still relevant today. Precise definitions of dyslexia have changed over time, but a number of common characteristics have been agreed. That those with dyslexia struggle to break down words into their smallest constituent parts, making the use of phonics in school close to useless for dyslexic pupils. Chair, it was the last government that set out how to understand and improve the provision for dyslexic children. In 2008, the Labour government tasked Sir Jim Rose to lead a review called the Rose Review to make recommendations on the identification and teaching of children with dyslexia. In 2009, the final report of the Rose Review identified or defined dyslexia as a learning difficulty that primarily affects the skills involved in accurate and fluent word reading and spelling. Characteristic features of dyslexia are difficulties in phonological awareness, verbal memory, and verbal processing speed. It is poignant, therefore, that it was under the last Labour government that Sir Jim Rose provided a clear definition of dyslexia, which makes it fitting that it is this Labour government that should carry on the work and build on that work by producing the first national dyslexia strategy to take forward what Sir Jim Rose began back in 2008-2009. As well as in our schools, there are inherent inequalities societal inequalities facing dyslexics, which fall under 4 categories. These are educational attainment, career progression, overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, and a higher proportion of dyslexic people using our mental health services. In education, children fare much worse. Looking at the 2023-24 academic year, only 22% of pupils with specific learning disabilities such as dyslexia achieved grade 5 or above in English and maths, compared to 52% of their peers. A strategy would set out a significant upgrade in teacher training curriculum in partnership with universities and unions, so that teachers are properly equipped to teach dyslexic children. Turning to career progression, it is clear that the 15-year-old Equality Act 2010 has largely failed dyslexics in the workplace. A strategy would outline specific expectations of the public sector and other sectors in what adjustments need to be made and what difference these adjustments are expected to make, with the opportunity to review. Turning to overrepresentation of dyslexics in the criminal justice system, the failure of our prison system to recognise and address the deeply troubling statistic that says between 30 and 50% of our prison population are dyslexic, way higher than the 10% in the population. But dyslexia does not predispose people to crime, but it is a lack of early support that can lead to educational failure social exclusion, and loss of confidence, all of which heighten vulnerability. And finally, looking at mental health outcomes, many dyslexic people experience high anxiety, low self-esteem, with many experiencing depression. These outcomes are preventable. With early identification, understanding, adjustment, support, and a culture that supports neurodiversity, we can prevent a lifetime avoidance of emotional, education, and workplace distress. And these are the reasons why I'm calling for a national dyslexia strategy. A strategy will call on the government to set out how they can improve the life chances of dyslexic people, supporting schools and workplaces, and in that way also benefit our health and criminal justice system. It would focus on early identification, consistent standards in the classroom, greater teacher training in kinesthetic and adaptive teaching methods, and it will ensure that those born with a learning difference are not socially excluded. This is about investing in our children and young people, and I ask the Minister today to commit to a national dyslexia strategy so we begin to process the changing of so many people's lives. Having the best start in life is a key ambition of this government, and I hope the Minister includes dyslexic people in that ambition.
Thank you. Okay. I would like to get to the front bench by 12:28. I don't want to put a formal limit on yet. We're Hubhouse.
Thank you, Ms. Butler. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, and I want to congratulate the two honourable members, my honourable friend from Yeovil and the honourable member from Broxtowe, for bringing this important debate to this chamber. On average, there are 3 children with dyslexia in every classroom, including in Bath. This is a conservative estimate, 3 children or even more in every classroom being let down by our education system, unable to receive the support they need to learn and succeed. People with dyslexia are often failed at the very first hurdle, with 80% not receiving a diagnosis until after they have left school, and some people never receiving a diagnosis. And Ms. Butler, I'm slightly freewheeling here, but I have a suspicion that I'm dyslexic, but I was never diagnosed. I was just always struggling with spelling. And once I had finished bluffing my way through German spelling test, which is my mother tongue, then English came along, and the same thing happened again. And all I can say with all those who are dyslexic, the feeling that you're slightly at sea all the time will never, never leave you. For those who manage to get a diagnosis is only the starting point. With increasing pressure on schools' budget and a lack of teacher training on how best to support neurodiverse children, a diagnosis is just the first of many, many challenges. Without proper support, children with dyslexia often find themselves falling behind in school because they struggle to learn at a similar pace to their peers. And again, from my own personal experience, I was a secondary school teacher, and because you have to just sort of rush through the curriculum, often the people who are struggling, you have so very little opportunity to get the support, and often all we do, we punish those who have a neurodiverse disposition, rather than supporting them. And that absolutely must stop. We must stop punishing young people in the classroom because we as teachers, or when I was a teacher, just simply do not know how to respond to their needs. 1 in 5 pupils with dyslexia achieve a grade 5 or above in English and math, compared to more than half of their peers. This gap is unacceptable. Far from being a reflection on academic ability, it demonstrates our education system failing those who need it most. Dyslexia often affects children's ability to spell, read, and write, fundamental parts of almost all examinations. As a result, many students struggle to navigate lessons and assessments that are not adapted to their needs. Identifying dyslexia earlier in children and offering them help will help those close the gap of attainment and ensure dyslexia is never the reason a child is prevented from learning. The wider impact of dyslexia on a child can be severe. It not only affects academic performance, but also mental health. That is, I think, the most important thing that we need to concentrate on. The sense of humiliation and the sense of exclusion that young people feel if they are dyslexic and not being properly supported has a severe mental health impact on a lot of young people. Too many people and children begin to feel as though they are stupid or dumb as they fall behind in school. Over time, these difficulties may contribute to more serious mental health issues, including depression and anxiety. Jamie Oliver is one of many remarkable campaigners who have highlighted the struggles many dyslexic children face in the education system by powerfully sharing his own experience. And if you see an experienced, strong businessman who's been so successful, almost sort of shuddering a little bit, remembering his experience at school where he faced but humiliation, it is so moving. I'm proud to have supported him in his campaign and will continue to do so. If anyone is yet to watch his documentary, Jamie's Dyslexia Revolution, I would strongly advise you to do so. It's a very, very powerful testimony. To truly support children with dyslexia, the government must reduce the steps required for an official NHS diagnosis while increasing funding to reduce waiting lists. Both measures will allow dyslexia to be diagnosed earlier. We Liberal Democrats are also pushing for increased training for teachers. As I mentioned before, it is essential that classroom practitioners understand where to go with support, so they can confidently identify and know how best to support all neurodiverse individuals, including those with dyslexia. These steps will ensure we can support every dyslexic child to realise their full potential and stop punishing them. Thank you.
Torquil Crichton.
Thank you, Ms Butler. A pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I'd like to pay tribute to the member for Yeovil and the member for Broxtowe for leading on this very important issue. And I'd like, if I may, in a very short time, give a Scottish perspective from a country where the government state 1 in 10 children are dyslexic. I'm so glad today we're joined by many young people as well. I count about 20 or more, which means perhaps 2 out of 20 suffer from dyslexia, and I'm sure far more of us speaking today have encountered the condition. And it is widespread. You know, we have a lot of data, but the gaps are quite wide in Scotland. We know that if you're a boy and you're fortunate enough to be diagnosed, you will be age 13 before you get a diagnosis of dyslexia. And for girls, it's 15. And that's a recognition of too little, too late, as the member for Inverness Skye and West Rothshire mentioned. Being identified late in school is no good, and we went to school at roughly the same time, although his skincare regime means that he looks a lot younger than I do. And while there's no doubt that dyslexia did not go recognised in his school days, not in mine, I was shocked to find out from Donna MacLeod of Dyslexia Life, an advocacy group in my own Hill and Near constituency, that young people and their parents, not just in the Western Isles but across Scotland, are still not dealt with properly in Scotland's schools. Donna MacLeod has worked tirelessly not just to have her own child assessed and supported, but having witnessed firsthand how the education system can fail pupils, she has asked that there should be mandatory screening for pupils and mandatory training for teachers in Scotland to recognise dyslexia in younger children. And this would come through a bill, a dyslexia screening and teacher training bill in Scotland, which Jamie Oliver campaigns for here, and Donna MacLeod would like to complete the work Jamie Oliver has started in Scotland. And with good reason, because as has been pointed out, some 40% of the 70,000 odd school children in Scotland with dyslexia are not receiving support. Studies made by Dyslexia show that 80%, as we've heard, of dyslexic children leave school undiagnosed, and only 1 in 10 teachers have a good understanding of dyslexia. There's clearly a need for this, but in Scotland there's a lottery on where you get support, because while the Scottish Government publishes statutory guidance for dealing with dyslexia under the Additional Support for Learning Scotland Act 2004, children with dyslexia are given additional support needs, but there is no mandatory provision. There is support. There's £200,000 core funding goes to Dyslexia Scotland to promote free online resources and a professional toolkit for teachers to support dyslexia and learners aged 3 to 18. But Dyslexia Scotland itself and the Scottish Government acknowledge that not enough is done, that more must be done. And what the more has to be is that the Scottish Government must move away from guidance to mandatory support. The Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills, Jenny Gilruth, MSP, recently wrote to all Directors of Education and Children's Services in Scotland, urging them to provide appropriate support for children and young people with dyslexia in schools. But urging and issuing guidance is not enough. And the Scottish Government does a lot of this, putting systems in place and thinking the mission is accomplished, when actually the mission is accomplished when we measure success and implementation and delivery. And there needs to be far more scrutiny of the work of Dyslexia Scotland and the kind of work and support the Scottish Government itself does for pupils. It's only with screening and with training and mandatory screening and training that this issue can be properly addressed in Scotland's schools and schools across the UK, so that many, many children do not leave school unsupported and suffering still from the effects of dyslexia. Thank you.
Shortcut, Adam.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Ms Butler, and I'd like to thank the honourable members for both Yeovil and Broxton to bring this really vital discussion on dyslexia to the Chamber today. Dyslexia is an evolving issue, with even a definition being discussed as we speak, because we have heard how 1 in 10 or over 1 million children are potentially dyslexic. Yet I think the definition itself, in my opinion, is too narrow to address that issue, and that is something that we should be working towards. Dyslexia diagnosis is difficult at the best of times, but unfortunately it is even more difficult for some amongst others. And there's a real inequality in diagnosis. So, as mentioned by my honourable member for Broxton, for too many families, diagnosed depends on not just the child's ability, but on a parent's bank balance. The figures are really stark. Work done by the Sutton Trust and others have shown that 90% of children in households who earn over £100,000 have a formal diagnosis. But unfortunately, only 43% of those in households under £30,000 receive one. You know, even after diagnosis, the inequality continues, with just 30% of young people from lower income households describing the support that they receive at school as good, whilst compared with 86% from wealthier families. The reality is, Minister, that when the private assessments cost £540 on average by a specialist teacher and £720 by an educational psychologist, it's frankly out of reach for too many people. I read something many, many years ago. A commentator summed it up very, very painfully, unfortunately, that rich parents have dyslexic children, whilst poor parents have thick children. And unfortunately, that is unfortunately something that we need to address. I would also like to address the point, another issue that widens the gap, and that is of race. Unfortunately, children from black, Asian and ethnic minority communities simply do not know, many simply do not know what the term dyslexia actually means. The expert, Janet Morgan, noted that many young black British people, in fact more than 80%, are not diagnosed until they get to university. And it's only then when they are pushed to their limits. She has spoken of the burdens of labels, you know, being black, being female, and do they really need another label of dyslexia? And we see then how visible and hidden differences together compound even further disadvantages. So when early research was done into neurodiversity, it ignored race, and the experiences of these children were written out of the story altogether, and this must be addressed. As the Honourable Member for Broxton also said, that studies have shown that approximately 30% of our prison population have dyslexia, but could be as high as 56%. So we need to help our children, essentially to help ourselves. Secondly, adequate training resources for our schools. Our schools are doing their best, but the truth is that many do not have the capacity to identify and support dyslexic pupils effectively. Special educational needs coordinators are often overstretched, and provision varies significantly between schools. There is currently no consistent national standards for SENCO training or for the level of support pupils should receive. Teachers want help, but without time, funding and specialist guidance, the ability to do so is limited. Thirdly, we need more clinical research on tools and aids that actually assist our dyslexic population. I declare my interest here as an optometrist, and we have provisions available for children, like changing the background of colours, coloured overlays, tinted lenses. However, And it does work. I've seen grown men crying because it's been the first time that they've been able to read to their children, and it's really, really effective. But the evidence is still incomplete. Therefore, the government should commission research to identify which tools genuinely make a difference so that schools can adopt the evidence-based approach rather than just relying on anecdotal, on trial and error. And just very quickly, I'm very lucky to be living in, being the MP of Leicester South, that we have Every Cherry Publishing, which offers a specialist range of books for dyslexic children and adults, which brings classics like Frankenstein and Christmas Carol, and amongst other stories, to be enjoyed by those with dyslexia. The book incorporates senses, signs and images to cater for students, and this is the work of educator turned publisher Emma Steele, and these books are changing lives. Minister, the British Dyslexia Association is calling for urgent and practical action. We need a national strategy for dyslexia, universal assessments and screening tools, a national standard for SENCO provision, greater investment in research, and a real sustained support for our schools. Thank you.
Josh Newbury.
To speak with you in the chair, and I'd like to thank and pay tribute to the honourable gentleman, the member for Yeovil, not only for his powerful speech in this debate drawing on his deep personal experience, but also for his steadfast campaigning in this place. He really is a strong advocate for children and adults with dyslexia. And my honourable friend, the member for Broxtowe, should also be given credit for her fantastic speech, particularly her call for a national dyslexia strategy, which I echo. When I speak to people in my constituency, often self-employed or small business owners, I'm struck by how many are very open about their experiences going through school with an unidentified learning disability, often dyslexia. Many say they felt stupid, and many were actively treated that way. And yet, what they needed wasn't dumbing down, it was simple and more inclusive, tailored ways of working. They have gone on to thrive, of course, in professions that they have a talent for, which I think shows us two things. That dyslexia does not limit what you can go on to achieve, despite how limiting it can feel in a restrictive school environment, and that we as a nation are missing out on a huge wealth of talent and success if we fail to give children with dyslexia support in their formative years. The government's curriculum and assessment review is an important and ambitious step, in my view, towards ensuring that every young person in this country benefits from a rich education. It's an ambitious, evidence-led piece of work led by Professor Becky Francis, which rightly recognises the importance of equipping young people with the skills and understanding they need to thrive in a rapidly changing world. The review also makes clear that the curriculum must work for all pupils, not just those who fit neatly within traditional measures of attainment. And I confess that I was one of those highly academic school children, but in a way that made me more acutely aware that actually I was in a minority and that most of school life didn't inspire my peers in the way that it did me. The review emphasises inclusion, high expectations for all learners, and the need for a coherent system that supports both academic and personal development. These are principles that I'm sure every member of this House would welcome. However, if we're to truly build a world-class curriculum, it must work for children and young people in all of our schools. And here, Ms Butler, I wish to reflect briefly on one area that we can clearly go much further, the experience of those with dyslexia. As we've heard, 1 in 10 children in the UK are thought to have dyslexia. For many of them, the difference between thriving and struggling depends not on ability, but crucially on whether their needs are recognised early and supported effectively. While the review refers to special educational needs and disabilities more broadly, it does not explicitly mention dyslexia, and I hope that that will be addressed by the department as it responds to Professor Francis's findings. We cannot afford to overlook the very real challenges that these learners face in a system still too reliant on one-size-fits-all assessments. Charities like the British Dyslexia Association and Made by Dyslexia have been clear. We must strengthen teacher training, ensure early identification and screening, and expand access to assistive technologies that will help pupils demonstrate their knowledge without being held back by barriers in reading or writing. They also remind us that dyslexia thinking, creativity and problem solving and innovation are skills our modern economy needs, and we should celebrate them. These are not criticisms of the review, but opportunities to build on its work. Its commitment to evidence-based reform, professional development and raising standards aligns perfectly with the goals of improving support for neurodiverse and dyslexic learners. By embedding dyslexia awareness and practical strategies into teacher training and the design of the curriculum, we can ensure that every child is able to access and benefit from the knowledge that our curriculum seeks to deliver. I therefore welcome the review's ambitions, and I'd ask my honourable friend the Minister to ensure, as I'm sure she will, that as implementation begins, the Department works closely with charities, schools and experts to ensure that inclusion is not just a noble principle, but a lived reality in every classroom. Thank you.
Charlotte Kane.
Thank you, Ms Butler. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I congratulate the honourable members for Yeovil and for Broxtowe for securing this debate and their excellent speeches, and I echo their calls for a national dyslexia strategy. Within 6 weeks of starting primary school, pupils are tested on their literacy, communication and maths ability and pushed to meet the expected standard in phonics by the end of year 1. Those that fail are pushed in year 2 and retested at the end of that year. This pressure and thoughtless comments by staff or pupils can make dyslexic child feel stupid or thick because they struggle to read and write. But they aren't. They're different. My constituent Neil contacted me earlier this year about improving SEND provision, giving the example of his dyslexic 15-year-old daughter Lucy. He told me that Lucy will leave school with, and I quote, low self-esteem and low expectations because the world will judge her based on her grades and she will assume that there are just things that aren't within her capability. That is shocking. Our education system must do better than that. If not diagnosed at an early stage, support isn't put in place and students struggle further. But as we know from Lucy, even when diagnosed, the pupils don't always get the support they need. And then they go on to sit their exams, often remaining undiagnosed, and as we've heard, only 1 in 5 dyslexic pupils achieve grade 5 or above in English and maths. So as they move into 6th form, they're further impeded from their 6th form studies because they have to resit English and or maths. Neil told me this morning that Lucy is sitting 2 mock exams today and that she was extremely distressed at the mere thought of going through such a stressful process. I'm sure colleagues will join me in wishing Lucy the best of luck today and through all her exams. Does the Minister agree that more should be done to give dyslexic pupils a fair chance in the assessment process? And can she provide an update on what steps the government will take to improve reasonable adjustments for pupils in these exams? If we can make early diagnosis the norm, not only can we help children to be more supported in the classroom, but also boost their educational attainment. Teachers, as we've heard, also need support to be able to spot the signs of dyslexia from an early stage and how to support dyslexic pupils in their classroom. Neil told me that his wife spends a lot of time emailing Lucy's teachers to give them constructive feedback on how a dyslexic student learns. No parent should be expected to bear this additional burden, and nor should teachers for that matter. So what is the government going to do to provide support to teachers so they're better equipped to support dyslexic pupils? I also discovered that the government doesn't publish data on levels of dyslexia among school-aged pupils, so we don't actually know the full scale of this problem. Will the Minister commit today to exploring this option further? We've heard many dyslexic people lead successful lives, famously Richard Branson, Jamie Oliver and Zoe Wanamaker, to name but 3. But too many do not, and as we've also heard, somewhere between 3 and 5 in 10 prisoners have dyslexia, compared to 1 in 10 in the population as a whole. We see from the many entrepreneurs and brilliant artists that dyslexic people have valuable skills to share. We need an education system which identifies dyslexic pupils early and supports their learning so that they all have the chance to succeed in life.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Chair, and what a privilege it is to serve under you today. And I want to thank the Honourable Member for Yeovil for introducing this debate alongside my Honourable friend from Broxtowe as well. So as others have said before, I've noted, dyslexia affects around 10% of the UK population, with 4% experiencing severe dyslexia. Up to 80% of those children with the condition leave school without a diagnosis or the support they need to reach their full potential. So when I was at school, that dyslexia, I think, was less well understood, even less understood than it is just now. And I was one of those kids who took a long time to progress through English. It took me 3 times to just, some people might not be surprised to hear, passed my O-grade English, which is the equivalent of O-level English in Scotland. And it wasn't until I became a university lecturer where I encountered kids who had a proper diagnosis that I started to understand the condition and how it affected me, and developed coping strategies which enabled me to go on to try to sit my higher English evening college. I did succeed, but it wasn't a journey I entirely enjoyed. But being a university lecturer, I did meet students who had been really well supported at school, and that had helped them reach their full potential. I taught civil engineering, so it often attracted students with good mathematical skills, but perhaps not the best English skills. But also encountered students who hadn't been diagnosed at school, and it wasn't until they had the first set of exams that they started to be flagged up as needing extra support.
Will the Honourable Member give way?
Absolutely.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving way. Do you agree with me that if someone who's got dyslexia hasn't been identified and fails their English exam at GCSE level and then has to go to college and retake it, it then puts them off going further to university? I know for me it certainly did.
Absolutely, particularly if the condition's not understood. They just assume that, let's face it, they're not the smartest kid in the class, whereas often the opposite is true. Because I know through working with students with dyslexia in my job as a lecturer, often they were real problem solvers, we've heard about that, real systems thinkers, and able to see the bigger picture. But that was once they had a diagnosis, we were able to support them in their studies. And I have to say, I mean, I worked in the sector for a long time. I first started lecturing in the late 90s. And back then, among staff, when we discussed dyslexia, it was spectacularly uninformed debates we had about the condition, spectacularly uninformed. I can remember one of my colleagues who was very well-intentioned talking about his hope that the student could shake off dyslexia by the time they left university. If only that was possible, that lecturer would be world-renowned by now, but sadly not. Still a great person, though. In Edinburgh, we are lucky to have organisations like Healthcare in Mind stepping in to help parents secure a recognised diagnosis in Edinburgh South West so that their children can finally access the support they deserve. But receiving a diagnosis and the associated help should not be down to a postcode lottery and should come early enough in a child's life to allow them to adapt their style of learning and make the most of their school experience. In a recent survey by Dyslexia Scotland, it showed that dyslexia is still widely misunderstood. Many parents, and I dare say some teachers, still thinks it's something that children can grow out of, or it only affects boys, or it's about eyesight, or it's something that children can overcome if they just try harder. Absolutely.
It's not the case that people just become better at bluffing and just sort of finding coping strategies, but that is not really getting to the point of really dealing with dyslexia.
Absolutely, and I became quite good at avoiding being given the pen to write on the whiteboard at school. I became very good at that, and that was absolutely a coping strategy. But at the heart of these differences in diagnoses, as we've heard already, is a real inequality. And I do think all of us here from all parties are here to reduce inequality. And in focusing that lens on dyslexia makes absolute sense. And of course we know that that dyslexia does affect everyone, and we do have a real duty to try to bring some justice to that. And I'm proud that researchers from Edinburgh University are leading groundbreaking work to help us better understand and identify dyslexia at an early stage. The recent study involving over 1.2 million people, so probably people from everyone's constituency here today, identified 36 new gene regions linked to dyslexia, confirming it as a neurodevelopmental brain difference. And I hope that confirmation of this biological basis can help reduce the stigma alongside fantastic campaigns like Dyslexia Scotland's Busting the Myths initiative. By challenging this stigma, equipping educators and supporting young people early, we can assure children with dyslexia are not left behind. So by understanding early intervention and proper support, we can transform thousands of young lives and help them reach their full potential throughout the UK. So I just want to end by talking about strategies, and I think the idea of agreeing to take forward a strategy today is a fantastic one, and I do thank my honourable friend, the member from Broxtowe, for proposing that. But as we heard from my honourable friend from Nahilan Nyar, and apologies if I've pronounced that wrong, we have a strategy in Scotland. But when you compare what's happening in Scotland, where we have a strategy, to what's happening in England, where we don't have one, there's not a substantial difference. So if we are going to agree a strategy, I think we have to ensure it's properly funded and real accountability, both for ourselves, parents, and most particularly for young people, to make sure we get the maximum benefit from it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A real pleasure and a privilege to serve under your chairship. Can I thank, first of all, the honourable gentleman for Yeovil and the honourable lady for Broxtowe for setting the scene. Nothing, I think, tells the story better, Madam Chair, than personal stories, and both the honourable members give us their thoughts on where we should be. And by doing so, they perhaps, I think, inspired others out there who perhaps maybe have dyslexia and perhaps other issues as well, and maybe they can say to themselves, you know, if he or she can do that, then perhaps I can do the same. And I know that would be the ambition of both of the honourable members, and I hope that will be the case. In this room, Madam Chair, obviously I'm pretty sure I'm the oldest person in this room, so I can go back to the 60s, the early 60s, as a child at school in Ballywalter Primary School. I remember it well. I remember some of the young boys, and particularly young boys, because the boys all tended to play together and the girls played together, so maybe that was the way it was back in those days. But there were young boys that definitely had issues. I never knew what they were, never for once ever understood what the problems were. But I did understand that they had some of the symptoms of dyslexia and perhaps other things as well. And looking back now, I don't even think anybody knew what dyslexia was. Didn't know what autism was. Didn't know what the children's issues were. And an honourable member who spoke before me referred, they'll grow out of that. That was a word that I heard often from the teacher, but they didn't. That was a fact. I want to, of course, give a Northern Ireland perspective to this, as I always do in these debates, because I think it adds to the information, and it also helps the Minister, who has no responsibility at all for Northern Ireland, but helps the Honourable Lady to understand what we have in Northern Ireland. This year, dyslexia is one which impacts every region of this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And whilst we don't fall under the direct remit of the Department of Education, the information share and best practice lessons are vital to ensure that we arm those with dyslexia to fight their way to their chosen career without the limitation of how they learn impacting their outcome. The fact is, Madam Chair, I believe it to be true, I think we all do, they can achieve their goals and they can achieve their job expectations, and that's what education should do and must do. A Northern Ireland study suggests that unfortunately some 25% of pupils may have some form of dyslexic type difficulties, while around 10% require additional support, probably similar to what others have referred to as well. In the 2021 school year, over 9,300 children were officially listed as having dyslexia or specific literacy difficulties. What must be said is the way that we view dyslexia has massively changed in recent years. That's good news. They know what it is now. Didn't know it when I was at school back in the 60s and early 70s, but they know now, so it's good news. And it's no longer a barrier to education, but it must be seen as a different route within education for them to achieve. So it's how that happens and how they do it here in the mainland. But I already mentioned Honourable Liddy for Bath referred to Jamie Oliver and that event that he had down in the Churchill room where he told his story. Wow, listen to him and the story and the success he has done. But not just that, look at Lord Sugar, look at Richard Branson, very successful businessman, Holly Willoughby as a presenter, Keira Knightley the actress, and even our own Princess Beatrice, who so beautifully delivers speeches and eloquently speaks on this issue. When we look at these very few examples of those who have done well, right away you say, Madam Chair, that if they can do it, well, I'll tell you what, we can do it as well. We can see that there is no barrier and should be no barrier and can be successful when we give these children the tools to their own learning to help them succeed and achieve. The important thing to focus on is early support and intervention. When it comes to dyslexia, identifying the signs early can make a world of difference. By spotting indicators early, we can create the tailored pathways to help children thrive in their education and personal development. A bit more time spent now will help them to achieve their dreams and their goals. It can, and indeed it must happen. I wish the Minister well in answering the questions. I don't doubt for 1 second the Minister's commitment to try and do better. To do these, schools need support as well. Reading and recovery schemes are essential, as is ensuring that early years teachers can spot the signs and signposts for assessment and help. The earlier we can spot the need, the easier the intervention will be, and the hopes are that by high school time, the child understands their needs, can get the support which ranges from a scribe to simply getting their test on a different kind of paper. Something so small can make a big difference. I conclude with this, Madam Chair. That cough of yours is getting worse. I say that very kindly, by the way, okay? Schools need the funding to do this and the expertise to get the tools right for each child. This can only come with a confidence system in place. So I look to the Minister, we all do, for the guidance and support for schools. And perhaps could I ask, Minister, share that with us in Northern Ireland. Thanks so much.
Spokesperson Anna Sabine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Yeovil, for bringing this important topic forward for debate, which he's raised consistently and which I know is personally very important to him, and also to the member for Broxtowe. As we've heard, dyslexia is a common lifelong difference in how a person processes language, affecting reading, writing and spelling, but it does not affect intelligence. In fact, many people with dyslexia excel at creative thinking, problem solving and seeing patterns that others miss. It's estimated, as we've heard, that up to 1 in 10 people in the UK are dyslexic. This is not a rare condition. Yet too often the system treats those strengths as an afterthought. Families wait months, sometimes years, for an assessment. In the meantime, children are told to try harder when what they need are simple evidence-based adjustments. Teachers do their absolute best, but without the training and resources to confidently support different styles of learning, provision can become a postcode lottery, and school budgets that are already stretched leave little room for specialist staff, assistive tools, and the protected time that inclusion requires. For many, diagnosis comes too late. If your child isn't diagnosed early, you can find they're already years behind other students when it comes to reading and writing. Early identification and practical support can change the trajectory of a child's education and their life beyond school. So what should we do? Firstly, we must put early identification at the heart of special educational need interventions. That means streamlining NHS processes so families aren't stuck before support need is recognised. It means investing to reduce waiting lists. I know that constituents of mine in Freeman East Somerset struggle to get timely diagnoses. And crucially, it means empowering schools to implement reasonable adjustments at the first signs of need, without forcing children to wait for a piece of paper before help arrives. Secondly, we need to equip teachers and schools to include every child every day. That starts with initial teacher training and continuous professional development that are practical, hands-on and focused on what works for dyslexia in real classrooms. It continues with the National Inclusion Framework, so every school has a clear, evidence-based blueprint for inclusive practice. It includes a national parental participation strategy, recognising that families are experts in their children and must be partners from the start, not last-minute consultees. We must also strengthen the role of the SENCO. They should sit on senior leadership teams and they should have protected time to do their work. They are the bridge between strategy and practice, and they cannot do that job effectively if they are spread impossibly thin. And we should reform Ofsted so that inspections look seriously at inclusive provision, not just exam results. Inclusion is not a footnote, it's a mark of a great school that every learner is seen, supported and stretched. Third, we should normalise simple adjustments and assistive technology. This is not about lowering standards. It's about measuring understanding, not just handwriting speed. Coloured overlays or paper, clear fonts, chunked instructions, alternatives to copying from the board. Text-to-speech and speech-to-text. They're incredibly difficult to say things. Text-to-speech and speech-to-text tools that help students access the curriculum and express what they know. These adjustments, yep, certainly.
giving way. I used to be a teacher, and I know from my own practice that many of the measures that were originally introduced to support students with special educational needs, including dyslexia, actually support all children to learn better in the classroom. Does she agree that we need to have much more focus on inclusive teaching practice, because that will support actually everyone in the classroom, including, most importantly, those with additional needs?
I absolutely agree with the Honourable Member, and as a parent of children who aren't dyslexic but who had other ways of learning that were well supported in schools, and as someone who later in life recognised that I had different ways of learning and would have benefited from different inclusive practice, yeah, I totally agree. They would have helped me say the words text-to-speech as well. These adjustments can benefit many learners, as you've said, not just those with a diagnosis. We can also use AI to help us in creating text that those with dyslexia can use. A constituent of mine from Peasdown St John was telling me last week that she has an older child with dyslexia who was diagnosed later on in childhood and is now suffering from a lack of age-appropriate resources. He really enjoys the Legend of Zelda computer game, so my constituent asked AI to write a story based on this for a person of his age with dyslexia with his characteristics. And she said it was the first time he's been able to read something that he's really interested and engaged in. AI can be a tool to allow a whole new group of people to access something they never normally would. We must also make sure there's a fair deal for families. Too many parents feel they must fight the system to secure basic support. A parental participation strategy should set out clear points of contact, transparent timelines, and co-produced plans that follow the child through school and into further education or apprenticeships. Families should not need to be experts in bureaucracy just to get the child the help they need. To achieve these changes I've set out, we need to work cross-party, and I'm pleased to see the cross-party consensus on this today, with families, educators and employers. The result would be a system that sees every child, supports every learner, and opens the door to a lifetime of contribution and success.
Opposition spokesperson Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Ms Butler. And I'm pleased to respond to the debate on behalf of the Conservative Party and on support for dyslexic pupils at school. And I congratulate the honourable members for Yeovil and for Broxtowe on securing such an important debate. Probably every family in the country has been touched by dyslexia, and mine is no different. The personal experiences described today have been very powerful, that it's right that they should inform our work as MPs and future government policy. And the themes we've discovered today about diagnosis, the curriculum, training, and support for teachers, the life chances of people with dyslexia were well covered by the contributions from members on all sides. Those who spoke of their own dyslexia are not only great role models, but evidence, as if it were needed, that dyslexia is certainly not about intelligence at all. And I want to thank the member for Broxtowe for her work with people with dyslexia before she was elected to this place. Reforming SEND is one of the most pressing challenges facing our education system today. I can see it in my own constituency in West Suffolk, and as proven by this debate, there's serious strain right across the country. The Education Secretary has previously said she won't shy away from what's difficult and long-term when it comes to SEND reform, and also that there's no responsibility she takes more seriously than this task. These are very welcome words, and we await the proposals from the government. Ministers originally promised to send white paper for this autumn, but it's been broadened into a fuller schools white paper and will not be published until next year. I don't want to overdo this because this is obviously a complex issue, and we don't want anybody to rush ahead with the wrong policies. But we'd like there to be time for the government's proposals to be thoroughly studied, and I hope members from across the House will have the opportunity to work with ministers constructively to get the best possible outcomes for children with SEND. And this is an issue that has been gathering for quite some time. We've seen a massive increase in demand for EHCPs, going up by 140% since 2015. In January 2024, there were over 500,000 children with EHCPs. SEND support in schools is now going to well over 1.1 million children, which is a 14% rise on 2015. A National Audit Office report shows that there's a significant gap between funding and spending for SEND, growing to around £3.4 billion by 2027-28. And data shows that 2 in 5 councils will be at risk of financial failure without intervention from central government by that year. by 28-29. Dyslexia affects people in all of our constituencies, and we've heard it said today that it affects 1 in 10 people across the country. The British Dyslexia Association found that 80% of people believe they're not clever because they have dyslexia, and 70% say it makes them feel bad about themselves. It affects children's self-confidence and self-worth as much as what and how they learn, demonstrating the sensitivity and care that we must take on this issue, and we've heard some of the stories about teachers and those in positions of authority who have got these things wrong in the past. But as the member for Yeovil said, there is no relationship between dyslexia and intelligence or behaviour, and people with dyslexia learn resilience and important problem-solving skills. Most worrying are the disparities in how people with dyslexia are diagnosed. For households with an annual income of over £100,000, 90% receive a diagnosis. But as the member for Leicester South said, households with an annual income below £30,000, it's closer to 43%. While a diagnosis doesn't guarantee an EHCP, it can at least help parents and teachers to understand a child's condition better and find the most effective ways to support them. There is certainly a case to be made for rethinking how we teach the curriculums to children with dyslexia, how we organise their classrooms and structure their time, and exploring the best teaching tools that are available, as many members have noted today. But most of all, we do need to get a grip on diagnosis. Clearly, there are parents who can afford to go private and do so to find out whether their child has dyslexia, but that option is just not there for many families, and I encourage the Minister to discuss this problem with counterparts in the Department for the Department of Health and Social Care to help to resolve this inequality. There's no reason why a child with dyslexia should not have the best possible start in life. We're not talking about how smart a child is, but about overcoming the obstacles to their learning and development. Going through this journey will shape who they later become as adults. This raises another issue about how education and health cannot be viewed separately and in isolation. As many as 54% of people with a learning disability have a mental health problem, according to the Mental Health Foundation. EHCPs sought to bind education and health together for that reason. And of course, that there are difficulties and much more progress to be made with EHCPs. But remarks from the Education Secretary and Christine Lenihan, the government's SEND advisor, have sparked some concern about parents. Christine Lenihan has said she's, quote, considering whether EHCPs are the right vehicle to go forward. And because we've yet to see what the white paper will say about the future of EHCPs, perhaps the Minister can give us and give parents some more certainty when it comes to her remarks. Ms Butler, this has been a highly informative and fruitful debate, helping us all to better understand the challenges faced by children with dyslexia and the broader reform agenda that should best help them in their education. Some things, as I've said before, about SEND more generally and about children's social care are far bigger than politics and party politics. When ministers are ready to put forward their plans for the future of SEND, I hope there will be serious attention given to children with dyslexia, taking on board what's been said today and listening to what parents and teachers across the country believe we need to do to help future generations of children.
I'd like to allow 2 minutes for the mover to wind up at the end. Minister.
Thank you, Ms Butler. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I'm sure that you will cough at the appropriate time if I'm going on. I'd like to thank the my honourable friend for Broxtowe and the honourable member for Yeovil for securing this important debate. I think, as others have said, as both of the honourable members are really important champions on this issue. The honourable member for Broxtowe has huge experience in their previous life in training teachers and parents, and has brought that into their work in the APPG. And since I've had the privilege of taking on this role, I have seen the honourable member for Yeovil at almost every debate, which I think says something about their passion and the way that they speak about their own experience and the challenges they've overcome, I think is inspiring for many young people. And I think, as we've heard from many across this room today, those who themselves have dyslexia or have children who have dyslexia are important voices within the debate, and this place is a stronger debating chamber as a result of that. I appreciate the constructive tone from everyone in the chamber today. As it's been said, this is such a critical issue for so many young people around the country. It's my own experiences as a council leader, and I've seen the huge challenges in the system, and I'm deeply motivated to change it. We are not waiting for the school's white paper. There's interventions already happening to support the SEND system. A mention was made of Ofsted, and changes to Ofsted to include inspection on inclusion are already happening. We're seeing changes to teacher training to support teachers to support young people with SEND, particularly adaptive teaching. We've invested an extra £1 billion this financial year into the high needs block, and an extra 740 million into kind of specialist places across the system. So those changes are happening, but we recognise wider reform needs to happen, and that I very much support the desire to work cross-party, to hear from members across the House, to help us shape those proposals, and also to scrutinise those as we go forward. On the issue of dyslexia, which people have spoken so powerfully about today, I attended a parliamentary reception hosted by the British Dyslexia Association recently, where we heard some of the stark research that people have referred to today. The statistic that really stays with me is the 70% one, with 70% of children and young people feeling bad about themselves because of their dyslexia. And we heard a powerful story of Lucy and her experiences earlier. And at that event, I spoke about my dad's experience, who was severely dyslexic, who failed his 11 plus, ended up leaving school with only 1 A-level, and him talking to me about how he felt like a failure at school, but he was one of the most creative and brilliant people that I've known. And we too many young people, and I've heard from too many young people who still today, so many years on, are still feeling that same way, that sense of, I think somebody described it as humiliation, but that sense that they are, they're not good enough, and that their huge creativity and contribution is not recognised, and it's something that has to change. And I think this debate and what we've heard, the ideas we've heard today, are really important within that. And I am with the honourable member for Bracknell, who was here earlier. I'll be visiting his constituency, where the British Dyslexia Association is based, on Thursday, and meeting with young people to hear their experience to feed into the white paper. But as I said, we aren't waiting, and there's work happening to improve things on dyslexia as we look at those wider reforms. And I wanted to start with the focus on reading that we've heard, and identifying needs around reading. And many MPs have talked about that early identification, and this is vital. And I think we've heard about phonics and some of the great successes that we've seen in phonics. 80% of young people passing their phonics screening checks, but there are 20% of young people who don't, and putting more support and intervention in for those young people is a key priority for us. We've also, in the curriculum assessment review response, set out a new reading test for all pupils in Year 8, and that is really focused on ensuring that we are identifying young people who are struggling in Key Stage 3, because some of the statistics we've heard around GCSEs, when we get to GCSEs, it's too late. So we need to be starting from, of course.
When we talk about reading, does the Minister agree with me that teaching assistants are vitally important with reading? Because without those teaching assistants, I wouldn't have got through the education. And to this day, if you give me a book to read, it daunts me. I've only probably ever read 1 or 2 books in my whole life to the end, because it just takes so much time. So do you agree that teaching assistants are vitally important to help with that reading?
Thank you. Yeah, I think I do agree that teaching assistants play a really vital role in supporting children with special educational needs that can include reading, and there's really good evidence of where that support is working. And I think we've heard today some of the huge challenges, but I also just wanted to refer to a school I visited in Amber Valley where there was brilliant support going on for young people struggling with reading. And I spoke to a child who had in the transition into year 7 he said that he had a reading age of a 4 or a 5-year-old, and he talked about how he was trying to access the curriculum but was getting increasingly frustrated and not listening. And the school had put in place a small nurture group focused on supporting young people with reading, and it was a range of children. Some had dyslexia, some didn't. And he was now 14, and he was that extra support, that extra intervention meant he was fully accessing the curriculum and really thriving. And that was a teacher-led intervention.
Do we not also forget that there's so much pleasure from reading when you can read? We are not taking away, that you don't attain, but also a whole world of pleasure that people receive from reading, and we should not forget that.
I could not agree more. As the daughter of a publisher, that was very much the mantra that I was brought up on. And I think reading gives us access to so many different worlds. It brings so much joy, and the government is taking forward the National Year of Reading to inspire young people to enjoy reading as well as accessing the full curriculum. So it's why we're strengthening existing programmes and introducing new ones to ensure that all children can secure essential skills of reading and writing. I talked about phonics, and we're in the academic year 2024 to 25, we launched a new training programme for primary school teachers, Reading Ambition for All, which aims to improve reading outcomes for children that need additional support, including those with dyslexia. It draws on the latest research about how children learn to read and the effective approaches to teaching those who need specific adaptations. And following the pilot year, we're now working with the British Dyslexia Association to refine the programme to further support children with dyslexia. And we expect the new programme to reach more than 600 schools. Our reading framework, which was updated in 2023, includes guidance on teaching reading to pupils with additional learning needs, offers guidance for schools on providing pupils with timely focused support that's related to their needs. And we're also working on a writing framework, and for those who saw the curriculum assessment review will have seen the focus on oracy within that, and the links between reading, writing and speaking. Our Reading Ambition for All programme is delivered by our 34 English hubs. It's launched in 2018. Building on the last government, the English hubs are dedicated to improving the teaching of reading with a focus on supporting children making the slowest progress in reading, many of whom come from disadvantaged backgrounds, as we heard today. They are outstanding at teaching early reading, and since its launch, the English Hubs programme has provided targeted support to over 3,000 schools across England. And this year, the English Hubs are delivering intensive support to over 1,200 partner schools, reaching over 140,000 pupils in reception and year 1. And 26.6 million has been committed for the English Hubs programme this academic year. And we know how important that transition from primary to secondary is, and that is a key area of focus for support. The debate has focused on early identification and intervention and the importance of that early support, and we know how critical that is for outcomes. The SEN Code of Practice makes it clear that meeting the needs of children with SEN should not require a diagnostic label. And so we want teachers to be able to offer support at the earliest possible point and where it's needed, regardless of the identified need. And in an inclusive education system, settings should be confident in accurately assessing children and young people's learning and development and meeting their educational needs with evidence-informed responses. I think we've had a good discussion about some of the areas where the evidence is strong, but some of the areas also that we need to see more evidence around assistive technology. And I welcome the focus on evidence and research, which is something we're committed to. Recently published evidence reviews from the University College London will help to drive inclusive practice as they highlight what the best available evidence suggests and the most effective tools, strategies and approaches for teachers and other relevant staff in mainstream settings to identify and support children and young people with different types of need. And the What Works in SEND research programme, led by a research team from the University of Warwick and supported by SEND academics from the University of Birmingham, is researching tools that settings can use to identify the needs of neurodivergent children and young people. I'll move to closing remarks. I think that the depth and thoughtfulness of this debate is incredibly important as we look to reform the special educational needs system. I hope to discuss all of these issues further. I know that I'm meeting the Honourable Member for Yeovil tomorrow, and I hope we can have further conversations about some of the ideas that have been set out today as we move towards the publication of the white paper, which it sets out a broader strategy for young people with special educational needs, and I hope we'll build on some of the really important issues that are raised today around teacher training and early intervention. We are determined to deliver reforms that stand the test of time, that rebuild the confidence of families, and crucially make sure that all young people are thriving at school, all young people are enjoying school, and all young people are getting the support they need.
Thank you. Wind up, Adam Dance.
Thank you, Ms Butler. I also want to thank my co-sponsor today. It's been absolutely fantastic to hear so many supportive remarks about dyslexia from across the House, and I think that's important to get across, is that actually this shouldn't be political, this should be done cross-party, because we want the best for our young people and the best for their future. And it's also very clear to me that in Parliament, dyslexia is on the agenda, which is great. Really good news. But it has to stay there, and it has to translate into real change. We need to make sure that this doesn't come off the agenda. So I will carry on pushing it, as I'm sure the Minister will get fed up with me eventually, and I look forward to tomorrow. And we need to make sure that the support means that schools is not somewhere dyslexic people fear, but somewhere to set them up to do what they want in life. Something stays with me. We all, as members of Parliament, visit schools in our constituency. And I visited a rural school the other day, and I did a talk about my life and why I got involved in politics and my background. And at the end, 2 lads asked their teacher to stay behind. And the teacher said, "You're not going to say anything you shouldn't be saying to Adam, are you?" And they said, "No, we just want to talk to him." And I said, "Let them stay behind." And you know, these 2 lads, who were primary school age children, it stuck with me. They both said to me, they said, "Thank you. We've both got ADHD and dyslexia. We keep thinking we're going to fail in life, and you've taught us that we're not going to fail in life, so I want to thank you for that." And even at that point, the teacher, just before that, said to those children, "Oh, what do you want to stay behind for?" So the children are already getting sort of, "Oh, you're going to stay behind to say something you shouldn't be." So that's the perception we've got to change in our education system. And I will follow those 2 lads' career and see where they get to, because that really has stuck with me, and I think they really will deliver well. So let's keep working together, and let's just get on with it. And I'm going to say